So Richard, tell me a little bit about your background as a player.
Okay, well, I was born in Sydney, Australia, and I studied at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, really in the high school there rather than music college. And about the age of 20, I came over here to the UK and to study privately with Peter Shitlov, who was the viola player in the Amadeus String Quartet. And within a year or so, I thought I'd love to do a bit of work in the profession, so I did some auditioning and very quickly joined the London Mozart Players and then the English Chamber Orchestra here in London, and then moved north shortly after my wife and I married, who's another viola player. And I've been working since then with Manchester Camerata, which is the main chamber orchestra in the Manchester area. So mainly as a principal player, so a lot of responsibility, but a lot of fun as well.
And when did you first start improvising?
Improvising really began in the late 70s. I was part of a church in central London, and they had a music group that worked together in the church, and they gave me no music. All I could do was improvise. And so really it began at quite an early stage. Before that, it was all trying to read music. And it was quite frightening, really, to do improvisation at first, but I've loved it ever since.
And you run a group that does a lot of different kinds of improvisation. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
So we run a group called Epiphany now. It's been going for about 10 years. And we love exploring improvisation alongside some classical music. The reason we like it so much is it gives us a huge palette of colour that takes us off-piste, completely off the page. And it's like an artist with a palette with a huge number of colours. So we're not stuck with what we're told we have to play or do, which is what will happen in an orchestra or a small group or whatever. We can respond to any situation we find ourselves in.
And what kind of contexts does Epiphany play in? It's quite a wide variety,
yeah.
Isn't it?
So we're very, very broad-based. We began with a few classical concerts, but also we decided to put on some improvised evenings where we just invited anybody to come along. We called it a happening, and we just improvised to see how people responded to that. And fascinating to see how many people were given really interesting ideas or pictures or thoughts just through what we played musically. That then expanded quite a bit, and we were invited into the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester, and that's where we began to explore some completely different ideas.
So one of the things that you guys do is sound portraits.
That's
Can you
right.
tell me a little bit about that?
Sound portraits are basically an extension of what we've been doing with the improvisation. So we were invited into the Whitworth Art Gallery in 2012, and we were asked to do some improvisation to the paintings and other exhibits in the gallery. And as we went in, we thought, well, it's interesting to play to pictures and just to improvise in the space. But if we can do that, surely we can improvise to people. And I've always loved looking at people and thinking, what do I see in that person? Even if I'm sitting on the bus or the train, what do I see in that person? And we thought, well, let's try and play what we see. So we can see a person sitting in front of us. We can see some pain in them, or we can see joy, or whatever it happens to be. And so we decided we would paint the picture that we saw. And it's fascinating to see how much response we get to that. People often say to us when we do these 5 to 7 minute sound portraits, how do you know that about me? What is it that you can see in me that you're able to play? And often people are in tears because they're so moved by this piece of improvised music.
And you've done these in a lot of interesting contexts as well, haven't you?
We have. We've been taken into many, many different places since the first gallery experience. We've been in many art galleries, including here in London at the National Portrait Gallery, but also in many, many different situations. So, for example, we were invited 3 years ago, to the Ideal Home show in London. And we spent 2.5 weeks in a purpose-built treehouse playing sound portraits for anybody who happened to wander in. Fascinating space because it's a consumer mecca a paradise for consumers and so noisy and crazy. And then people walked into this really beautiful treehouse, into a very quiet space, and we improvised a picture of them. We did something like 450 over 2.5 weeks, which was incredibly tiring, but it had a profound effect on people that they just did not expect. So we've been in places like that, Hampton Court Flower Show, RHS Flower Show. We played for asylum seekers, for recovering alcoholics and drug addicts, special needs schools, and every time in every place it has much more of an effect than words would, just a conversation in words. It gets right to the heart rather than just in the intellect, if you like.
So what was the impetus for this particular project?
This project is really interesting. It came out of some ideas that we had with a group of us from the Musicians Network coming together actually several years in a row now. Each September we meet and just have a day together. And during that day we allow some space just to improvise. And some of those times of improvisation have been so profound, and we had you, April, singing in those, and they were such joyful and profound moments. Just had the idea, could we actually improvise a full classical work? And so had the idea, why don't we try and do an improvised oratorio? Had no idea when we first mentioned that what on earth that would mean, but that was where the idea was born.
And so what has it been like to try and bring it about?
It's been a major challenge on this. We've had a group of about 5 or 6 of us, haven't we, that have got together, and we've just carefully, prayerfully thought, okay, how can we turn these ideas of improvisation into a full-scale work that will keep people's imaginations alive? It's one thing just improvising for an hour, but that's probably too unstructured. So we came up with this structure of doing 7 movements, as we're doing this evening, starting right from the beginning of time, going right through to the end of time, and basing it on the idea of a river. And it's been amazing how those ideas have come together. So we've got huge numbers of feelings and ideas, moments, right from incredibly still through to really joyous, where everybody is playing and just expressing everything that's in their hearts.
And what would you see? What would you hope to do with this? Do you have any future hopes for this context, for this project beyond today?
My desire is that it will so capture people's imaginations, us first, but everybody who comes, that people will say, you must do more of this. Or we will say to ourselves, this is so much fun as it is, and we would love to take this elsewhere. It's completely groundbreaking. We don't think anybody has done anything quite like this before. So my hope and my dream and my belief is that it will so capture people's imaginations that people will say, we must do more of this. Because I think we're speaking now in a culture that is desperate for something beyond the mundane of life. And I think what this work is doing is speaking really powerfully into that and pointing people outside of themselves and outside of the mundane things that they do each day to something much higher and much bigger, and actually much more important, ultimately. And I think that's desperately needed.
Well, the whole thing began when I first came to one of the meetings of the Musicians Network, and we tend to do some improvisations as part of those sort of annual vision days. And it was like nothing that I'd ever experienced. I mean, I'd done some improvisation as a folk fiddler, a little bit as a singer, and also in the context of things like playing in church, but I'd never actually done anything on that scale. And it was also pretty special because you had all these amazing orchestral musicians in one place improvising, and it was like having a symphony just spring into being around you. And it was a really unique experience. And especially the second 2 times that I did it, there was something quite special that happened. I think so everybody in the room felt that that was something pretty unique. And so Richard approached me and said, well, do you think that we could perhaps extend this? Do you think we could make something bigger out of this? And we were chatting with Peter Asprey, who's the director of music here at St. Sepulchre's, and the idea of an improvised oratorio was first mooted probably nearly 2 years ago. And we thought, oh, well, wouldn't it be great? And it took us a while to do that. And then so we've started meeting and hammering out what would need to actually happen, and hence we're here today.
What does it take to be a soprano singer? What kind of a dedication and anything that comes with this does it take?
Well, there's the combination, I suppose, of the instrument that you're given and the way that you learn to play it. I think that I was lucky because I started playing violin long before I studied singing, and so I trained as an instrumentalist first. And so I think things like being able to pitch notes, sing in tune, and the way that I'm able to shape phrases all really comes back to that, and the sense of physicality in the actual singing. But I think that you do have to have lots of energy to do it. It does take a lot of energy, but I think it's the mental preparation, and I think of it like being an artist in sound. That I am there with my palette, and I'm sort of dabbing away to think, well, I'd like a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and how wide a range of sounds can I make with my voice, and how wide an emotional palette. So I think it takes dedication in the training, but I think it also takes great imagination. And I had a teacher who inspired me to do that, and others who have kind of given me the technical things. So I have fun in between the actual capabilities of my instrument, and also making as wide a range of sounds as I can, and really trying to tell the stories. And so I think as a soprano, that's what I feel my job is. My job is to touch people, to help them to interact with the stories that I'm telling, and with the text that I'm delivering. So in a sense, this is the same, because we have 18 players. It's basically a full orchestra. All the normal sections of an orchestra represented, and we even have a Baroque group, which you wouldn't normally have in a symphony orchestra. And I've been very lucky because I get to sing with Baroque groups as well, and those instruments are very different, and they have a very different sound world. Well, I've been given a voice, and I think I've been given an imagination to match it. I think that I love text as well, because I'm a poet. That's one thing that really inspires me, the actual words that I'm dealing with. Today is an interesting example, because some of the text comes from the Bible, some of it comes from the liturgy of the church, and some of it is my own. And so whenever I'm singing my own words, it's like I have to pretend they were written by someone else. But it's some sort of coming at it from a different remove. But I love bouncing off the ideas that I have on the page. It's like raw material, and I think, great, okay, so what can we do with this? And then I'm trying to create a whole three-dimensional world in sound from what I do. So I think text is a big part of that. But in this context, also trying to kind of bounce off other people, and build on what they've given me.